So I think we need to understand the nature of this political, these political forces that are behind the landlocked strategy. That is why I will be articulating in our platform what I call a fight-back strategy. It will begin with the creation of a well-resourced war room at the Alberta Department of Energy, whose mandate will be to respond in real time through paid, earned, and social media to all of the lies and myths told about Canada's energy industry. It will also have a litigation fund to support pro-development litigation, and particularly coming from the First Nations who want to be partners in prosperity. Why is it that in the debate about the duty to consult, the courts and the public and media seem to focus exclusively on the minority of First Nations who are anti-development? I think it's brilliant that we see a consortium of Northern BC First Nations, the Eagle Spirit Consortium, saying, where was the federal Crown's duty to consult us before it arbitrarily vetoed an approved pipeline, Northern Gateway, that would have been an opportunity for us to move to prosperity? And isn't it a shame? You know, the First Nations that got to the Federal Court of Appeal on Trans Mountain were funded by the Tides Foundation, similar foreign sources of funds, and often that kind of litigation is funded by the federal Crown. But the Eagle Spirit First Nations have to crowdsource fund in order to hire lawyers to make their claim that their duty to consult has been violated. If I'm Premier, we'll be writing checks to allow them to go to court. We'll be supporting pro-development litigation. Thirdly, we will address the flagrant violation of Canada's charity laws by organizations that are political pressure groups obsessed with shutting down Canada's energy industry, masquerading as charities. And so I will ask our Attorney General to develop the evidentiary case of the violation of our charities laws by a number of these groups, including those that were involved in the recent Trans Mountain litigation. And we will send that evidence down to the Canada Revenue Agency. If the agency refuses to act on that evidence in a reasonable amount of time, then we will make an application at the federal court for a mandamus writ, compelling the CRA to make an administrative decision on the flagrant violation of charities law by the David Suzuki Foundation and its fellow organizations. Thirdly, next, I will call into the Premier's office the heads of our major energy companies and invite them to discuss a new approach to social license. If they want social license to develop the resources that belong to Albertans, we will expect them to actively defend those resources and the people who work in those companies. I will be looking for an energy company that has legitimate standing to replicate the litigation strategy of Resolute Forest Products, which is suing Greenpeace under the RICO statute in American courts for $300 million in damages for its 20-year-long campaign of defamation against RFP's responsible forestry practices. The same organization, Greenpeace, and many of its allies have engaged in exactly the same kind of defamation. By the way, at discoveries in the U.S. court, they admitted that they purposefully lied about RFP's forestry practices. It's time to make these organizations be responsible and accountable for what they do and what they say. It's time to make them lawyer up and to put them on the defensive for having tried to kill this country's engine of prosperity. Next, if we have companies like foreign, multinational companies like HSBC. HSBC has announced their intention to effectively boycott credit facilities for the Canadian oil sands, while at the same time being a major supplier of credit to Vladimir Putin's Russian oil industry. So if companies like HSBC buy into this international boycott campaign, then the government of Alberta will boycott them. They won't be doing any business with the government of Alberta or any of its agencies if they decide to apply a double standard to this province and its economy. Finally, this fight-back strategy will involve real consequences for partners in the Federation who violate the economic union of Confederation through arbitrarily trying, through regulatory or litigation strategies, to block the export of our largest product. For example, the British Columbia government's opposition to Trans Mountain. I was proposing 15 months ago, that we be prepared to replicate Peter Lougheed's 1981 turn off the tap strategy. I'm glad that the current Alberta government finally came to see the wisdom of that approach. Unfortunately, I think their fellow travelers in Victoria don't really believe they're serious about this, since they've called the Edmonton's bluff. But I think Premier Horgan would understand that I am serious about defending the vital strategic interests of Alberta, using every tool at our disposal. And then finally, I think it is time for us as Albertans, not all Albertans in this room, and this applies to Saskatchewan, the two primary contributors to equalization and the whole system of fiscal federalism. It's time for us to identify our greatest points of leverage on these issues. You know, as I said to 500 Atlantic Canadians 2 days ago, Albertans, Westerners are generous. We don't mind sharing much of our prosperity when times are good here and bad elsewhere. We're proud to have played that role, and that role that has been fueled by the energy industry. But what Albertans find unacceptable is governments and political leadership in other parts of the country wanting to benefit from the wealth generated from this energy industry while doing so much to block its development, the development of these resources. I said in Atlantic Canada, how can you expect to benefit, for example, from wealth generated by fracking in BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba when you've imposed a moratorium on fracking, that you refuse to develop your own resources? This is unacceptable. It's not acceptable that politicians in Quebec who benefit from $11 billion net in equalization and much more through other transfers, federal transfers, have stood in opposition to Energy East as an example. And so I'm prepared to do whatever we can to advance our demands just for fairness in the Federation. One strategy that has been proposed that I think has merit would be to say to the federal government that if you insist on proceeding with the No More Pipelines Act, Bill C-69, if you refuse to guarantee us the construction of a coastal pipeline to significantly reduce the price differential, then we will put equalization on the table, not waiting 5 years for renegotiation, but immediately by triggering the 1998 Quebec secession reference of the Supreme Court of Canada, which says that if a province holds a referendum on a constitutional amendment with a clear question and a clear majority voting in favor, it imposes on the federal crown a binding obligation to negotiate that amendment in good faith with the province. So I would be prepared to hold, in principle, to hold a referendum in Alberta on Section 36 of the Constitution, equalization. Based on my polling, about 90% of Albertans would support it. And that would then impose on the federal government an obligation to sit down and to discuss with us the terms of equalization. It doesn't mean we would get our desired outcome, but what it would do is to take a page out of the playbook of Quebec political leaders who have been so effective at asserting their province's agenda at the national level. It is time, folks, that we stopped being passive, defensive, and apologetic. It is time, I submit, it is time that we used all of the political and economic levers at our disposal. I'll just close with this. According to the International Energy Agency, there will be a growing global demand for hydrocarbon energy through at least the 2040s. Since the tar sands campaign began a decade ago, there has been an increase in consumption and supply of oil of 10 million barrels per day. That initiative hasn't done anything to reduce consumption or demand or supply. This question is existential for our economic future, but it is also, I submit, a moral question. Either through surrender to these foreign-funded sources of defamation of this industry in Canada, either we abandon global energy markets to the world's worst regimes, to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the dictatorship in Iran, the catastrophic dictatorship in Venezuela. Either we allow them to dominate global energy markets, or with determination, we move forward on the offensive, unapologetically, to do everything possible to get our Canadian energy to global markets, I think the world is counting on us to get it done. Thanks very much.